The crackle of the county-issued radio broke the quiet hum of my truck's AC. The sun, not yet at its 9 o'clock peak, already bore down on Luna County. Unit 12 to dispatch. What V you got, Sandy? I said into the mic. Mac, got a call, it's a strange one. A hiker out by the Crimson Spires reported a body. Said it's well, you'll need to see it. Near Coyote Jaw Arch. A muscle twitched in my jaw. Coyote Jaw Arch wasn't a casual stroll. It was at least an hour's trek from the last dirt road, which itself petered out into wilderness deep within the broken land of ravines and stone mesas east of town. Young Deputy Miller is on his way, Sandy added. Sounded a bit green on the line. Figures. Tell him to secure the scene, not to touch anything, and to wait for me. Will do, Mac. And be careful. The hiker sounded spooked. Really spooked. I grunted and hung the mic on its hook. Out here, spooked could mean anything from sun-addled hallucinations to something far more tangible. The truck clawed its way over the final miles, transmission in low range, tires kicking up dust and gravel as I navigated ruts deep enough to swallow a lesser vehicle's axles. Eventually, the ground grew too steep and broken, and I parked in the meager shade of a Palo Verde. I grabbed my pack, canteens, sidearm, camera, and Evans kit. The walk-in was like stepping into a furnace. The air shimmered above the red rock. The only sounds the crunch of my boots on the baked earth and the occasional, angry buzz of a horsefly circling in the still air. By the time I spotted Miller's county vehicle parked near the edge of a dry wash, sweat had soaked through my shirt. He stood at the lip of a small canyon, staring down, his shoulders tense. Miller, I said, my voice raspy. What's the situation? He turned, relief washing over his young face. He couldn't have been more than 23. Detective Cole. Sir, thank God you're here. He swallowed, his trembling hand gesturing vaguely. Down there, at the foot of that pillar. I followed his gaze. 40 feet below, a scree slope descended to the canyon floor. A lone stone shaft, a hoodoo, stood there, its form like a long, slender finger of rock worn thin by time and wind. And at its base, in the mottled shadows, was something wrong. Even from this distance, I could see it. I raised my binoculars. My breath caught. It wasn't at the foot of the pillar. It was on it, seemingly growing from the rock itself, about 10 feet from the ground on a narrow ledge no wider than a man's 2 feet. The body, a man by the look of his shoulders, was seated upright, but not in a natural posture. It was rigid, the limbs arranged unnaturally. One arm stretched out, the bones of the fingers exposed as if pointing west toward the setting sun. The other arm was bent and laid in its lap in a crude imitation of rest. The man's skin was like dark leather, stretched taut over the bones beneath, as if he'd been curing in the relentless heat for weeks. I started down the slope, loose rock sliding under my boots. Miller followed, clumsy on the unstable ground. The air in the cut was thick, smelling of dust, hot rock, and something else, a dry, pungent odor with a sharp, acrid note I couldn't place. There was no smell of decay, which was just another wrong detail. As I got closer, the terrible craftsmanship became clear. The outstretched arm wasn't just bare skin and bone. Barbed, vicious segments of Cholla cactus had been woven into and through the flesh, forming a kind of armor over the bones. Where muscle had receded, polished riverbed stones, milky quartz, and banded agate had been pushed into the hollows, glowing softly in the shadow. They were wedged between bone and dried sinew, as if the creator meant to replace what the desert itself would have taken. The man's head was canted to one side, his face hidden by a mask. Not a store-bought mask. This one was made of cracked, sun-dried clay the color of the earth. 2 small holes for eyes, a line for a mouth. It was a crude, dehumanizing thing. A thin line of black ants marched across the clay and down the man's throat, disappearing into his shirt collar. Miller's voice was shaky. Sir, who would do this? I looked at him, my face a mask of its own. An artist, I said, my gaze returning to the grotesque figure on the rock, to the terrible care of it. A very sick one. The only sound were the ants on the clay and the hot wind sighing through the rock passages. Whoever did this knew the desert. They had taken its stark soul and made it stage. I took the camera from my pack. Documenting this would be a long, evil labor. And I knew, with a certainty colder than a desert night, this wouldn't be the last of his work. The dead man from Coyote Jaw Arch lay under the white lights of the county morgue. Dental records identified him as Thomas Ashton, 45, from Tucson. He'd been missing for 3 days, a birdwatcher drawn to the desert. Dr. Ramirez, a calm woman familiar with the desert's usual toll of heat, thirst, and falls, worked on him all afternoon. But Ashton was something else entirely. I stood in a room with her, listening. The office hummed with a quiet purpose that belied the tremor Ashton's sentinel-like body had sent through our small department. Young Miller had been sent home, scarred by what he'd seen. The desiccation, Ramirez said, peeling off her gloves, her voice tired but precise, is accelerated, beyond anything natural. We're talking about something that should take weeks, months, even condensed into maybe 72 hours tops. She pointed to a magnified image on her screen. There's evidence of a chemical agent, some kind of aggressive desiccant. Almost a tanning solution, but cruder. Sprayed on, I think. Post-mortem. So he was killed, I stated. Then placed. Then treated. Precisely. Cause of death for Ashton appears to be blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Quick, almost merciful, considering what came after. She shook her head. The cholla insertions are deliberate, almost surgical in their placement despite the brutality. No defensive wounds, so he was unconscious for that part, thank God. The clay mask was formed directly on his face. The ants, Mac, those are from a specific harvester colony I've only seen a few miles from the arch, near the old cinder cone. They don't naturally congregate like that. They were introduced. Someone is bringing tools to his work. I murmured, a chill crawling over my skin. Someone strong, with knowledge of the terrain and an unnerving amount of patience, I said, and specific natural resources. In the following days, I sifted through old missing person reports, scoured local online forums for talk of strange camps or solitary men in the wild places. I spoke to park rangers, BLM agents, and old ranchers whose land stretched for 50 miles around Coyote Jaw Arch. No one had seen anything like it, or at least, no one was talking. Thomas Ashton had no apparent enemies, no strange habits besides coming here to watch birds, an outing that had led to this end. The pressure from the county sheriff, a good man worried about tourist season and bad press, was mounting. Find something, Mac. Anything. People are scared. I was finding things, but there were only more questions. Ashton's digital footprint was a dead end. The hiker who found him was just a man who liked to walk in the open country and now wished he hadn't. I kept returning to the craftsmanship, the terrible order in the display. It wasn't the work of rage. It was obsession, a message. But for whom? The cholla, the polished stones like jewels in dead flesh. The lines of ants on their dark errands, these things began to haunt my sleep. I'd wake in the dark, the image of Ashton's clay face seared into my mind, the dry rasp of the desert in my throat. It was late on the 3rd day since we brought Ashton down from the rock. The sun was a smear of orange and purple on the western horizon when Sandy's voice came over the radio. It wasn't sharp this time. It was low, tight, and shaded with something close to dread. Mac, you out there? I was chasing a half-baked theory about old mining claims near the cinder cone, where Ramirez had mentioned the unique ants. My truck was parked near collapsed at it, the air cooling rapidly. Go ahead, Sandy. We got a call from Old Man Henderson. You know him, lives out past the Ghost Rock Flats. I knew him, a recluse who came to town twice a year for supplies. He never called anyone. What does he want? I asked. He says Sandy's voice dropped even lower. His scarecrow started moving. A beat of silence. His scarecrow? That's what he said, Mac. Kept repeating it. Said it's out in his west paddock, near the dry well. Said it's different now. He sounded terrified. Won't go near it. Won't even look at it again. He just wants us to come. A coldness settled in my gut. Ghost Rock Flats was another 30 miles of bad road into the empty heart of the land. But different. Scarecrow. My mind flashed to Thomas Ashton on his stone pillar, transformed into something not human. Tell Henderson to lock his doors and stay inside, I said. I'm on my way. Is anyone with him? Negative. He lives alone. Understood. No more radio unless it's urgent. Miller's office shift. I'll take this. I knew the risk. But if this was what I thought, bringing in a deputy, even a seasoned one, might just complicate things. This artist might enjoy a witness, but perhaps not a crowd. The drive took over an hour. Darkness had fully claimed the desert by the time I reached the edge of Henderson's property, a sagging barbed wire fence. The only light was the sweep of my truck's headlamps across the wasteland. His cabin was a small, dark shape, a single point of fear in the vast emptiness. I cut the engine and lights and listened. Nothing. Only the sawing of crickets and the whisper of wind through the salt bush. I grabbed my heavy flashlight and my sidearm and walked toward the cabin. Mr. Henderson, I called out, my voice low. Sheriff's department. Detective Cole. A shaky voice came from behind a boarded-up window. You come alone? Yes, sir. Just me. Are you all right? The thing, he said. In the west paddock. You gotta see it. All right, Mr. Henderson. You stay inside. I'm gonna look. Just show me the way. A thin, palsied hand pointed through a crack in the boards. Out past the old tractor. Near the bones. Bones. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Stay put. The west paddock was a flat expanse of cracked earth, dotted with the skeletal remains of Joshua trees. My flashlight cut a white path through the darkness. I saw the rusted, canted shape of an old tractor. And beyond it, at first, it looked just as E.D. said, a scarecrow, ragged from the weather. A tall frame of sticks, with torn clothes flapping in the night wind. But as I drew closer, the beam of my light settling on it, the true form revealed itself, and the air I drew into my lungs felt like ice. It wasn't just different. This scarecrow wasn't made of straw and old cloth. The frame was wood, yes, but it was an intricate effigy, not a simple cross. Lashed to this frame, with rusty baling wire, was a human form. A woman, smaller than Ashton, her bones more delicate, but just as desiccated, her skin like old parchment stretched over her frame. Her arms weren't outstretched in the typical scarecrow fashion. They were bent and twisted upwards, her thin fingers spread wide against the vast, star-filled sky, as if frozen in a final, silent plea to a deaf heaven. Her clothes, a faded floral dress, were torn and arranged on her with a kind of awful artistry. But where a scarecrow's head would be a sack, hers was bare. It was tilted back, her mouth open in a scream that had been caught and mummified in her throat. And the additions, my God, the additions. Wisps of gray, brittle tumbleweed had been woven into her hair, forming a wild corona around her head, like Medusa's snakes. In the hollows of her eyes, there was no clay. There were round, flat pieces of turquoise set carefully into the sockets. Her lips, drawn back from dry, hard gums, were stained a deep, unnatural red, a color that could have come from crushed berries or powdered stone. But the worst of it, the thing that tightened a cold knot in my stomach and made the hairs on my arms stand on end, was what lay arranged on the ground around her. The bones Henderson had mentioned. Skulls. The small skulls of desert animals. Coyotes, jackrabbits, birds, even a gopher. Dozens of them. They were laid out in a perfect spiral on the cracked earth, tightening as it reached her bare, mummified feet. Each skull was turned to face her, a silent congregation of skeletons come to worship at her altar. I took a step back, my flashlight beam wavering. This wasn't just murder. This was different for what he had done to Ashton. This was a ritual, a form of worship. A new horror took root in my chest. This woman couldn't have been here for more than a day or two. He was working faster now, growing bolder. His theater was becoming grander. I swept my light around the silent paddock. The wind sighed, carrying the faint, dry scent of creosote and sage. And beneath it, that other scent, faint and acrid, the one I.D. smelled before. He could be out there in the darkness, watching me, waiting to see what I would make of his new work. My hand went to the butt of my Sig Sauer. The desert silence was no longer peaceful. It was a silence that waited, and I was standing in the middle of his gallery. The beam of my light held the woman in Henderson's west paddock. I keyed the radio. Sandy. It's Mac. Her voice came back, quick and wired. Mac, Henderson said you found it. He won TB still. Yeah, I found it. Sandy, listen carefully. I need a full team out here at dawn. Forensics, backup, the me. Until then, tell Mr. Henderson to stay locked inside and not come out for any reason. And patch me through to Sheriff Brody, his home line. Wake him if you have to. Copy that, Mac. On it. I brought the truck closer, setting the work lights to cast their hard glare on the scene, careful to keep them off the ground. I photographed the woman from every angle, my breath smoking in the cooling air. The meticulous care was evident up close, the wire tied with that same specific looping knot. The woman was younger than Ashton, maybe in her late 20s. No name for her yet. The sun and whatever chemicals he de-used had drawn the flesh tight to the bone, making her a thing of leather, wood, and wire. The tumbleweed woven through her dark hair stood out like horns touched by a mad wind, a cruel halo against the black sky. And in her eyes, he had set polished, round, flat stones, the color of the deep noon sky-high grayed turquoise that caught the light. When Sandy patched me through, Brody's voice was thick with sleep, but cleared quickly. Another one, Mac? As bad as the first. Worse, Sheriff. Different. More performative. This one feels like it's addressed to someone. Dawn broke gray and pitiless, and with it came the county vehicles. The forensics team moved quietly, their voices low in the face of the scene. Dr. Ramirez, her face a stone carving, began her preliminary on-site examination. Old Henderson was led from his house, his eyes averted from the west field. I looked again at the skulls arranged at her feet. Clean, sun-bleached bone, each one facing the woman on her strange crucifix. Dr. Ramirez spoke beside me, her voice low as she examined the stones in the woman's eyes. Notice anything odd about the materials, Mac? She asked, gently probing one of the turquoise eye coverings with a gloved finger. This isn't the cheap stuff from roadside souvenir shops. This is old mine quality. Specific veins. Bisbee blue, maybe, or sleeping beauty, though that S rarer this far south. My mind started working. The Bisbee and sleeping beauty mines were hundreds of miles away, too far for a desert loner to casually acquire. Anything local that would match? Ramirez shrugged. Most of the old claims around here played out decades ago. Small operations. But there are stories. Some of the really remote box canyons up in the Diablo Range. Near the Twisted Sisters Peaks, local prospectors swore there were untouched veins of gem-grade turquoise up there. Hard to get to. Treacherous terrain. The Diablo Range. Twisted Sisters. I knew the area. A broken country of deep canyons and ridges like the bones of some ancient beast. No cell service. No help for a man who got lost. And the small owl whose skull lay among the others, Ramirez said its kind nested in those high canyons and nowhere else in the county. Over the next 24 hours, we canvassed known turquoise claims and rockhound haunts, but the Diablo Range theory solidified. The animal skulls also created a more refined geographical profile when cross-referenced with specific habitats, a particular subspecies of ground owl, whose tiny skull was nestled amongst the others, predominantly nested in the higher altitude rock formations of the Diablo Canyons. The second victim was identified as Sarah Kim, a geology student from UNM, reported overdue from a solo mapping expedition in the Diablos a week ago. She hadn't even been officially listed as missing until yesterday. Her car was found at a little-used trailhead leading directly toward the Twisted Sisters Peaks, precisely where the high-grade turquoise veins and unique ground owl habitats converged. He hadn't created his work where she fell. He had brought her down from the mountains to Henderson's flatland, a signpost in the desolation. He had used Ashton for practice to learn his craft. But this woman, she was a map. He drew the lines and set the markers for me to read, as if he knew who would come looking, as if he expected a certain eye to follow his signs. "You want me to find him, Sheriff," I said, standing in Brody's office, the preliminary report on Sarah Kim in my hand. These aren't random victims anymore, and their placement isn't random. He's leaving geographical markers. The sheriff looked at the report, the lines in his face deep. And you think this workshop of his is up in the Diablos? I'm almost certain of it. The turquoise, the specific owls, Sarah Kim's last known location, it all points to those canyons around Twisted Sisters. That has Suicide Mac going in there after him. That's his home turf. We can set up a perimeter, maybe use a helicopter for aerial recon. If he even has a fixed base, we could search those canyons for weeks and find nothing. He's mobile. He knows the terrain too well. By the time a full search team is organized, he'll have vanished, or worse, taken another life. No, if I go in quiet, alone, he might just lead me to wherever he feels most comfortable, most powerful. It's a huge risk, but Brody put his hand flat on his desk, staring at it. After a moment, he said, "But you feel it's the only way to get ahead of him." He looked at me for a long moment. "All right, Mac. All right. But you go in with full comms as long as they last. Check in every 30 minutes once you're past the trailhead. One missed check-in, and I'm sending everything we've got. Protocols be damned." Understood. The sun was falling toward the western mountains when I turned the truck toward the Diablos. The good road ran out, then the graded dirt, then it was just a track among the stones that clawed at the tires. The land rose up in ancient, brooding walls of stone, the air charged with an older energy. I parked near the same deserted trailhead where Sarah Kim had left her car and took a deep breath. I grabbed my pack, rifle, sidearm, and extra water. I stood for a moment where the trail began, a faint depression in the gravel and rock. Only the wind moved through the narrow rock passages with a sighing sound. Sarah Kim's tire tracks were there, already faded. There was no other sign. I went into the canyon. The stone walls climbed into the failing light, streaked with ochre, crimson, and the sick green of copper where turquoise might be found. The gravel crunched under my boots, the sound loud in the great silence. My radio crackled one last time before the stone would block the signal. "Unit 12, what's your 20? It was Sandy's voice. At the Twisted Sisters trailhead, "Sandy," I said, "entering Diablo Canyon now. Beginning 30-minute check-ins." "Copy that, Mac. Godspeed." "Yes," I thought. "Godspeed. I need it." And I went on into the dark, where he waited or where he did not. But he knew I was coming. I was walking into his country, into the stone heart of his work. He had the place chosen, and he had a shape in mind for the thing he would make of what I brought him. Myself. The canyon narrowed, the walls closing in so tightly I could touch both sides with my arms outstretched. The air grew cold, like a cellar cut from the mountain, heavy with the damp scent of unlit earth, and something more raw, chemical taste of metal in my throat that overlaid the dust and old decay. The wind died. There was only a great stillness and the sound of water weeping from hidden seams in the rock. The light failed. I switched from my hand lamp to the harder beam of my rifle light, a spear that pierced the gloom but left the periphery in deeper shadow. The slightest sound of my passage, the whisper of cloth, the grit of a boot on rock echoed back from the walls, magnified and ominous. I felt like I was beating a drum, announcing my arrival. My 30-minute check-ins with Sandy were terse, my own voice tight in my ears. Still moving west into Diablo's main gorge. Nothing to report, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. I knew I was being watched. Then the signs appeared, markers on the rock. A stone, rounded like a dark egg, on a high shelf where no stone should be, giving off a faint, hoary luminescence. A posy of dried desert sage tied with that same deliberate, looping twist of old wire that had bound the woman at Henderson S. And then, where the rock turned sharply, a spray of raven feathers, black against the pale stone, pinned with bone slivers driven into crevices. At the tip of each feather, a chip of blue stone gleamed like a mad eye. The narrows opened into a grotto, no more than 20 feet across, roofed by the mountain itself. And I saw his place. My breath caught. I had prepared myself, but the reality was beyond any sane imagining. It was a small space. Along the far wall, shelves of weathered wood and precariously balanced stones were laden with the tools of his art. Old, home-mined chisels, coils of dried animal sinew, bone awls, buckets of clay done, ochre, and a black like night. Pouches of powdered pigment, rows of cholla segments, their spines clipped with terrible care. And jars, glass jars holding strange colored liquids, and in them, fragments of things I wouldn't name. Feathers, teeth, hair, and what looked like human nail parings. The altar of the place was a sandstone slab at its center, upon which pulsed a light not of this earth. Great fungi, brought from some deeper darkness, clung to the nearby rock, their ghostly luminescence illuminating the slab and what lay upon it. Polished stones, sharp flakes of black obsidian, and human bones. The long bones of legs of femur, a tibia, a collarbone like white porcelain, all cleaned, burnished, with small holes drilled into their surfaces as if for stringing. From the cracks in the rock walls hung his other works, his sketches in flesh and bone. The dried, stretched carcass of a coyote, its ribcage broken open and packed with glittering quartz crystals. A thing made of bird wings and the skulls of small beasts, wired together to shift in some unfelt breath of air. It was a charnel house and a demon's atelier. I could smell the iron of old blood, the sharp bite of his chemicals, and a cloying sweetness, the perfume of rot held in careful stasis. I swept the rifle S-beam into the deeper shadows. "All right," I said, my voice a rasp in the dead air. "I know you're here. Show yourself." Nothing. Only the ceaseless drip of water, measuring out eternity. Then, a scrape of stone behind me. I spun with the rifle, my finger on the trigger. He stood in the mouth of the passage, a dark figure against the lesser dark of the canyon, blocking the only exit. He was tall, built of wire and bone, his clothes the color of the dried earth. He held no weapon I could see, but his hands were dark with clay and some other, older, blacker substance. His face was lost in shadow, but I felt his gaze on me, a physical pressure. "You appreciate it, detective." His voice was a soft, reedy rustle, the voice of a man certain of his vision. Not many can see the beauty in transformation, the way the desert takes and the way I help it along. "Beauty?" I said, the rifle steady on his heart. "Ashton, Sarah Kim, is that what you call beauty?" A slow nod from the shadows. "They're constant now, detective. Beyond time's reach. Their decay is arrested. I gave them permanence. The desert is a slow artist. I accelerate. I refine." He took a small step forward into the fungal light. "Stay where you are," I said. He ignored me and took another step. "You, Detective Cole. Marcus, you understand the land. You see the patterns. I saw in the way you studied Thomas. You look properly, like a connoisseur. Sarah, she was destined for my celestial offering piece. Henderson's scarecrow, you called it? Fitting. She gazes at the stars I adorned her with. Forever. A chill that had nothing to do with the cave's air moved through my blood. He had heard me. He had been in the dark paddock at Henderson S, listening. "This is not art," I said, my voice hollow. "This is murder. Sickness. Is there a difference?" He whispered, and then he moved not at me, but to the side, a lean, sudden motion like a striking snake. His hand found a purchase on the rock wall. A groan of tortured stone came from above, a deep, guttural sound as the mountain shifted. The overhang, the roof of rock, dislodged by some hidden lever, began to fall. Without thinking, I threw myself sideways, hitting the hard floor of the cave. The rifle spun from my grasp. A choking cloud of dust rose, thick as ash, burying the fungi's light and plunging the chamber into deeper blackness. I coughed, sucking dust blind. He was on me before I could draw breath. I didn't see him, I smelled him, the raw earth, the bite of his chemicals, and an older, graver stink. A wiry, mad strength. His fingers like talons clawed at my face. I lashed out, connecting with something solid, and heard a grunt. We rolled on the cave floor, a thrashing knot of limbs in the stinking dust. His thumbs found my throat and pressed. Light burst behind my eyes. I bucked, twisted, my hand flailing on the broken stone, and my fingers closed on a heavy, sharp-edged shard. I drove it upward toward where I judged his head to be. A flat sound, a choked noise. The pressure on my throat eased. I struck again with the stone. And again. He hissed and recoiled. I scrambled back, gulping air like a landed fish, my hands sweeping the floor for the rifle, for the hand lamp. Where? You don't see, he rasped, his voice ragged with rage. I was going to make you magnificent. A glint in the ruin, the faint light of the disturbed fungi seeping through the dust. He had armed himself from his table with a long, wickedly sharp knife of polished obsidian. He came at me, a shadow wielding a thong of black glass. My hand went to my boot and found the hilt of my kabar. I drew it as he lunged. I met his charge. Steel struck stone with a screech and a spray of tiny sparks. We were too close for any other weapon, locked in a deadly grapple. He moved with a frenzied speed, the obsidian blade a whisper of air before my face, then a line of fire across my left forearm as it bit deep. Pain bloomed, hot and sudden. He made low, bestial sounds in his throat. I ducked under a wide sweep of the black blade that would have opened my throat and drove my shoulder hard into his chest. We stumbled backward together into the deeper part of the cave, over loose rock, and crashed into his sandstone workbench. His tools, his jars, his hideous creations went skittering and smashing to the floor. My collection, he shrieked, momentarily distracted by the damage. It was the opening I needed. He turned his head for a split second. I thrust upward with the kabar. He twisted like a cat, but the blade found him, glancing off a rib, then sinking deep into his side beneath his arm. He roared, a sound of ultimate outrage and pain, and staggered back, his hands clamped to his side. A dark fluid, black in the dim light, poured through his fingers. I gave him no time. I lunged and tackled him, driving him down amongst the ruin of his workshop, amidst the shards of clay and the scattered bones of men and animals. He thrashed beneath me, his strength still a terrible thing, his breath hot on my face, stinking of his own blood. My lamp, I saw it, half buried in the rockfall at the cave's mouth, its beam pointing crookedly at the roof, broken but alive. I couldn't reach it. He heaved under me, his free hand groping, and closed upon one of the human femurs from his collection. He swung it like a club, and it met my shoulder with a sickening crack. A white, blinding numbness shot down my arm. My grip on the knife loosened. He tried to roll me, to gain the top, his eyes burning with a feral light. The desert, he gasped, blood at his lips. Accept your offering. He was strong. God, he was strong. I brought my knee up hard into his wounded side. He screamed, a thin sound, and his back arched. In that instant, my eyes, now accustomed to the faint light, saw a stone glinting on the floor beside his flailing hand. One of the pieces of blue turquoise, heavy and angular. As he drew back the femur for another blow, I snatched the turquoise. It filled my hand, heavy, its broken edge sharp. With a grunt torn from me by pain and desperation, I brought it down not on his head, but on the wrist of the hand that held the bone. He howled, a thin, high, terrible sound that echoed off the unseeing rock. He was hurt. I pressed my advantage, striking with the heel of my good hand at his face again and again, until he went slack beneath me, his breath coming in shallow, ragged pulls. I rolled off him, every part of me a fire of pain. My arm, my shoulder. I lay there in the dust and the ruin of his madness, breathing the air of grit and blood and chemicals. Above me, the stone was indifferent. His breathing beside me was a wet, halting sound that slowly diminished into silence. With an age of effort, I found my kabar. Then the hand lamp. The lens was cracked, but the light held. I turned it on him. He was younger than I would have thought beneath the grime and the wildness of his eyes, perhaps 30. Those eyes, empty now, still held some ghost of his terrible devotion. Around him lay the broken instruments of his worship, the ruined icons. The turquoise stone lay near his shattered hand, dark with his blood. My radio lay in pieces. Useless. It took what felt like a lifetime, moving through a fog of pain, to reach the emergency beacon in my pack. My hands trembled. Then there was only the waiting. I leaned against the cold stone. The desert wind had found a way into the tomb, sighing a lone note through the fallen rock. It didn't sound like a lament. It sounded like nothing at all. Time had no measure in that place. It might have been hours before I heard the beating of helicopter rotors, a sound from another world, growing louder. Brody had kept his word. They found me there amongst the detritus of his visions, the man himself sprawled, offering a few feet away. They used words like shock. Perhaps. What I felt was a great hollowness, in an age I had not earned. I had lived. He had not. But a piece of me was buried in that dark cleft of rock, with the bones and the clay and the dark stained turquoise. The desert had taken its due, and the beauty I had once known in the stark, silent places, the spare solace of the rock and the sun, was now overlaid with the memory of this man and what he had made of that solitude a darker shape within the shadow. The wind still called in the high rocks, but now it carried a different voice. And I knew that in the quiet places when the sun was low, I would look for signs in the dust and listen for a footfall that was not my own, the safety of my weapon a familiar weight in my hand. Always.